She tried to get me arrested, until the cop looked at my ID. That's the part nobody talks about. Not the cold stares, not the whispering neighbors, not the fact that I'd lived in that house longer than she'd been alive. Just the moment she picked up her phone, looked me dead in the eye from across the street, and called 911. The only thing that can beat speeding in a school zone is getting pulled over by the cops while driving your car. There are two things guaranteed to put you over the limit: kids on bikes and buses. While these areas are meant to be safe havens for our next generation, they're also places where we're most likely to get cited. That's why it's so important to know what to do when an officer pulls you over in a school zone. You can definitely bet that if you get caught speeding in one of these areas, you'll get a ticket no matter what. But there are ways to possibly get out of them, especially if you have some quick thinking skills. In today's video, we'll look at a situation where someone tried to get the protagonist arrested but failed miserably when the police found out who he really was. Our story begins with a young man named Kyle, who is a senior at his high school and was looking forward to graduating soon. Kyle was never in a rush, but one day he was running late for school and didn't want to get another tardy on his record. As he drove through the neighborhood near his school, he kept an eye out for any shortcuts that would allow him to get there faster. That's when he noticed that the road was closed off due to construction. So he thought to himself that he could drive down a nearby residential street that would normally be off limits to cars. Since it was usually closed to traffic because it went right past the local elementary school, since it was the weekend and all the school buses were parked away, Kyle thought he was in the clear. He floored it down the hill, but then he heard sirens and saw flashing lights in his rearview mirror. He had been clocked speeding by a cop who had been hiding behind a parked car waiting for speeders. Kyle knew that he wouldn't win in a chase, so he pulled over immediately. When the officer approached his window, he was ready to give Kyle a lecture about speeding in a school zone, but he was stunned when he realized that Kyle was only 17. That changed everything. Then let's just say that this encounter ended up being a little awkward. Now let us take a closer look at this story and see how the tables were turned on this woman who tried to get Kyle arrested. First off, we have to give props to the officer who pulled Kyle over for speeding. It takes a lot of patience and skill to sit in an unmarked car and wait for the perfect opportunity to pull over a speeder. But this cop was clearly up for the challenge. He wasn't just any ordinary cop, though. In fact, he was a special kind of law enforcement officer, one who was dedicated to keeping the streets safe for everyone, especially children. He had a keen eye for spotting potential dangers and was unafraid to take action when he saw something that could cause harm. His colleagues respected him for his bravery and his ability to anticipate problems before they became major issues. But even he wasn't prepared for what happened when he approached Kyle's car. The officer was a stickler for traffic laws, and he knew that Kyle needed to be punished for his actions. But when he looked into the car and saw that Kyle was only a teenager, his tone changed. Suddenly, the officer felt a sense of responsibility wash over him. He knew that he had the power to shape Kyle's future, and he didn't want to waste it by giving him a lecture or a ticket. Instead, he decided to take a different approach. The officer was a father himself, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of protectiveness towards Kyle. He remembered what it was like to be a teenager, and he knew that making a mistake at that age didn't define who you were as a person. With a deep breath, the officer decided to give Kyle a break. He knew that this was a teachable moment, and he wanted to make sure that Kyle learned from his mistake. The officer decided to engage Kyle in a conversation about the importance of following traffic laws and the potential consequences of breaking them. He explained to Kyle that speeding in a school zone was a serious offense that could have put other people's lives at risk. At first, Kyle was defensive and tried to argue with the officer, but as the conversation continued, he began to understand the gravity of his mistake. He apologized to the officer for speeding and promised that it would never happen again. The officer accepted Kyle's apology and let him off with a warning. However, he wasn't done with Kyle just yet. Before letting him go, the officer gave Kyle a piece of advice that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He told Kyle that everyone makes mistakes, but it's what you do next that defines you as a person. He encouraged Kyle to use this experience as a learning opportunity and to become a responsible and caring member of society. Kyle took the officer's advice to heart and vowed to never break the law again. This encounter left a lasting impression on both the officer and Kyle. The officer was proud of himself for using his authority wisely and helping a young man learn from his mistakes. Meanwhile, Kyle was grateful for the officer's understanding and guidance and realized that he had been given a second chance that he didn't deserve. But that's not where the story ends. In fact, it was just the beginning of a beautiful friendship between the two. From that day forward, Kyle became a model citizen, always looking out for the safety and well-being of others. He volunteered at local schools, organized community cleanup events, and even started a mentorship program for young people. The officer, meanwhile, continued to serve his community with honor and distinction, always remembering the importance of compassion and understanding. Together, they became known as the dynamic duo of their town, working tirelessly to make it a better place for everyone. Now, we don't want to brag, but we think we know why this story has resonated with so many people. It's because it reflects the values and aspirations we all share. We all want to live in a world where people are given second chances, and where those who help others are celebrated. This story reminds us that no matter how rough things may seem, there is always hope for a better tomorrow. If you love stories like this, we invite you to join our community of fellow readers and viewers. As for the mom, well, she's still out there trying to get everyone arrested. But her efforts are becoming increasingly futile. That is because the cop who pulled Kyle over has a photographic memory, and he remembers every interaction he has with people. When he saw Kyle at the grocery store a few weeks later, he stopped to chat with him and found out that Kyle was going to prom. The officer even offered to drive Kyle and his date to the dance in his police cruiser, which was decked out with flashing lights and a PA system. Kyle and his date were thrilled and accepted the offer. And then disaster struck. While the officer was driving, a woman in a minivan cut them off. The officer slammed on the brakes and turned on his flashing lights, preparing to pull the woman over. But before he could do anything, the woman sped away, almost causing an accident. The officer chased after her, but she was too fast for him and soon disappeared from sight. Dejected, the officer returned to the road and continued on to the school where prom was being held. As they arrived, Kyle and his date thanked the officer for the unforgettable night and went inside to join the other students. The officer watched them go and couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had not only given Kyle a memorable prom night, but he had also taught him valuable lessons about responsibility and respect for the law. As he turned to leave, the officer noticed a familiar minivan parked near the curb. The same woman who had cut them off earlier was standing next to it with a group of teenagers. She was laughing and talking with them, and the officer couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. A white minivan with paper plates was just seen leaving the scene. As the other officers responded to the call, the officer approached the woman and introduced himself. "I'm here to see your ID and registration," he said. The woman's face paled, and she quickly began rummaging through her purse. The woman handed over her documents, and the officer noticed that the name on the license did not match the name on the car's registration. Suspicions confirmed, the officer arrested the woman and charged her with providing a false name to law enforcement, obstructing justice, and driving under the influence. As the other officers arrived, they helped escort the woman to the police cruiser where she was placed under arrest. The teenagers in the group began to panic, but the officer calmed them down. "It's okay," he said. "Your mother will be out soon and I'll make sure she's okay." The teenagers looked at each other in disbelief. "You're a good kid, and I know you'll make the right choices in life." The teenagers nodded, but their eyes were still filled with tears. He had not only protected the students at the school dance, but he had also made sure that their mothers would face the consequences of their actions. The teenagers might have been disappointed in their mothers, but they could be proud of the fact that their moms had been brought to justice. Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today's story. But if you want to hear more about our brave officer and his encounters with crazy people, I'm going to make sure to check out our channel. We've got plenty more stories that are sure to keep you on the edge of your seat. So what are you waiting for?